Welcome everyone, I hope you're all doing fantastic, and today we are going to be discussing Total War Warhammer 3 and the multiplayer domination scene. So currently we are on the 1.0.2 patch, but CA have announced the 1.1 patch to be released on the 5th of April. So for those that haven't seen my previous video talking about the patch notes for 1.1, feel free to go down below in the comments where I will leave a link so you can see all the future changes here for Warhammer 3. Now, without further ado, let's dive straight into this. So we are going to be doing a tier list where S is going to be the best factions in the current domination scene and C is going to be the worst. Now, this is going to be based off my personal thoughts and opinions, which are going to come from the CA stats, and then also my observations in the current multiplayer scene. So please do feel free to leave your comments down below of any different opinions you have here on the multiplayer scene, but please be respectful to myself and other people in the comments. So from the CA team, you can see here from the ranked playlist, we do have some percentage win and loss rate here coming from every faction in the game. So Grand Cathay here had a 32% win rate, which is pretty low, and then it's going to be a massive 62.6% win rate there for the Ogre Kingdoms. Now I will be taking these into consideration, but do they differ here to the competitive scene? Absolutely. So I'll be taking both of these parts into consideration when I put my tier list together. Now with this tier list, some factions could go up or down depending on a few elements, and when we do have the 1.1 changes, I'm sure we're going to be seeing some big changes here on the graph. So starting with Grand Cathay, a pretty interesting faction, but I'm going to be putting there at the C tier. As you can see there, 32% win rate is going to be pretty low there on the rank domination, and that doesn't particularly change too much here in the multiplayer scene. Now, we're going to dive straight into it, and as you can see here, something I really like about Grand Cathay is their wide array of lore choices and winds of magic. You are going to have yin magic, yang magic. We are also going to have the Astromancer, the Alchemist that also brings in the metal magic with Xiao Ming, and then also healing magic here with Miao Ying. Now, she can be partnered up really nicely here with the Terracotta Sentinels, the unbreakable single entity monsters that cause terror, 600 armor piercing weapon strength, magic damage, good armor, they're super tanky, and then with regrowth, Earthblood alongside Miao Ying can make these bad boys extremely strong. Also here, you can be bringing good elements like the Great Longmar Riders, fantastic flying cavalry, 105 speed, 110 armor, so they're super tanky, good weapon strength at 65, and 75 charge bonus, which they can actually pick their engagements. They don't have to engage things that they don't particularly want to, because there's certain units that just can't counteract the charge here coming from the Great Longmars from the sky. So you have a couple of fantastic models here that can really make up a nice army from Grand Cathay, but they're super expensive. So 3 units of the Great Longmar Riders, that's going to be 4,500, that's nearly 50% of your reinforcing army, or as you can see here, if you bring double Terracotta Sentinel and also Miao Ying, that's pretty much going to be your entire army. As you can see here, with only double peasants, you probably could drop this a little bit more. I don't really know what you would drop. Maybe you would drop Missile Mirror, and then you could perhaps bring in an extra peasant long spearman. But even then, that starting force is not looking fantastic. These two can hold down a domination point on their own, but they need infantry and range support. So what is so good about Grand Cathay? Their range. They have a massive range, some of it armor piercing, some of it here just going to be regular crossbows that are really cost efficient, some with shields, some without, Ironhell Gunners, which are really good cheap shotguns with mass armor piercing, and then cheap peasant archers, which as you can see in domination, or sorry, in the land battles from Warhammer 2, were really cost efficient. So missile infantry very strong. Now the infantry is where we start to see a bit of a struggle here coming from Grand Cathay. Celestial Dragon Guard, Jade Warriors, both halber units for the anti-large and armor piercing, which are very specific. Now they can fire up against armored infantry, but of course they pay a lot here for bonus first large. I believe Celestial Dragon Guard do actually have quite good bonus first. Yeah, so 20 bonus first large is pretty damn strong. So they're really good here up against any large heavily armored cavalry or any single entity large monsters with good armor. But, you know, for example, Exalted Bloodletters with, you know, they're going to be infantry, low on armor, and they're also going to be anti-infantry armor piercing themselves. They're just going to make mincemeat here of the Celestial Dragon Guard. But what do they have to counter that? Outside of missile infantry, not very much. The Jade Warriors really aren't going to win. They pay majority there for armor. They do have some good things like the defensive stance, which gives them extra added armor when standing still in domination points, but even then, the infantry options aren't huge. I think the most cost efficient is going to be the Peasant Long Spearmen, but their durability is so low. Now, for such a cheap unit, 350 gold, they do have charge reflection and expert charge defense, so that does make them pretty strong for 350 gold cost, but they can simply just be shot. So, what do they also have that's pretty decent? Artillery. So, ground cannons, the fire rate rockets can be pretty decent, and they do quite well on certain maps. So, if we take Broken Leg Gully, or we have Death Pass that have massive openings in the middle of the map where artillery, range units can be really used on the battlefield to great effect. You really see them do quite well. However, on maps such as the Galleon's Cove, where you've got these ginormous mountains or, just these elements in the way that are certainly going to compromise the visibility of the cannons or the, any of these artillery pieces, you really see that Grand Cathay starts to suffer because they can't rely on the massive DPS output of these artillery pieces. Now, Sky Junks up against the Chaos factions, they suffer in the air. We do have the Mobile Furies, 110 speed, they come in mass numbers, they're really cheap. They can even just compromise and even just take down Sky Junks, and it forces you to really invest in expensive units like the Great Longmire Riders, or even bring your Lord back to defend this big chunky model. Now, if you do play up against a faction such as Kislev that doesn't have Sky Force, they can actually do quite nicely. Now, obviously, it does mean you have to bring range units here to deal with Sky Junks, but they can be quite dominant if you don't have any tools to deal with them, but that seems a massive risk indeed. The cavalry is okay, it's not brilliant. Peasant Horsemen, pretty cheap, and they do have Vanguard deployment, so they've got that going for them, but they're not very durable, and they don't win in many conquests. And Jade Lancers, they're going to be heavily armoured, but they're pretty much going to be the same there as the just regular Empire cavalry. They don't have massive shock damage, which you can get here from the Great Longmire Riders, or the good splash magic damage from the Terracotta Sentinels. Also, Terracotta Sentinels unbreakable, they have great capture weight. Yeah, the cavalry just really doesn't pack enough punch for me for domination, which is really what you need. You need to get on, have a massive impact, and then dominate a certain area of the battlefield, where I just don't feel like the cavalry here from Grand Cathay does. I don't think the faction synergizes very well. There are some really nice ideas. So, for example, if we take the Master of the Element Winds, when you get multiple of these on the battlefield, you actually boost your winds of magic, or should we say the intensity of your spells. So actually, you basically get more bang for your buck. And if you, for example, if we take Earthblood, it's 0.8% healing per second. That actually increases with the more Master of the Element Winds you have on the map. So it actually becomes and makes spells more cost efficient. So there's so many nice ideas for Grand Cathay, but it just feels clunky. It's slow. The speed is like 28 and 30 here, and the same for the missile infantry. Yeah, I'm just not particularly happy with how this all interacts on the battlefield. So moving on to the next faction, we are going to have Khorne. So Khorne is, it was my ride or die. In the beginning, it was my first go-to. I think it's probably the simplest and easiest faction for brand new players to learn. Khorne has no magic, of course, and overall is just basically a very strong, robust faction. All of the units are pretty good, and that's why I'm going to put it in the very top end of the B tier. I think it is a great faction. I think it's a great one for people to start. But I think there are many ways around Khorne and many ways to deal with Khorne. But we'll go through it here as we talk. So with the faction, we see here great lord choices, Scarbrand, super powerful, the mobility of the Exalted Bloodthirst and that mass weapon strength, the fact that it can fly, and then also the abilities it can bring to the table. You can make it faster. Deathbringer just makes it an absolute sniper. Bella's Furies, you can get breath attacks. And then you can also get explosion spells to get yourself out of nasty situations. Yeah, these two good single entity lords are very, very powerful. The Herald of Khorne is also a really powerful option. He comes on many, many mounts, and he's really, really cheap. So, for example, you can bring him for as cheap as 900. You can put him on a Juggernaut, which gives him good mobility. You can even put him on a Blood Throne, which actually gives him healing in combat, I think. Yeah, it gives him Gore Feast, Totem of the Endless Bloodletting, which gives bonuses to all your units, and then the Hellblade, which, when you get more than 80 kills, gives you a base weapon damage and armor-piercing buff. You also have other items like Revelant Slaughter, Locust of Wrath, that just gives you good bonuses throughout the battlefield, so it's a great support character here for all the Khornite forces. The Cultist of Khorne is probably one of the best heroes for melee combat in the game. Put it here on an Armoured Steed, it gives good speed, it still has a shield, it has Silver Shield on foot, but still great weapon stats, good charge bonus, good mobility, and it has a summon. you can summon an 800 gold unit of Bloodletters to the battlefield that just really bolsters this force. You can get it onto a domination point, good anti-infantry armor-piercing unit that can come and just delete everything on that domination point. So it's super powerful. And this thing can really duel up against most other lords and heroes in the game. So a really powerful entity indeed. Most of the units on here are very strong, but they're not overpowered. So for example, we take the Flash Hounds, very, very strong, good magic damage, so they can fight well up against other demons. They do actually have 65 weapon strength, 22 of that being armor piercing. Good charge bonuses, very good mobility. Same can be said here for the Warhounds on the mobility point, and then also Furies. The fact they can fly with also 100 speed and magic damage, and then these bad boys also come with Frenzy, I believe. Which, yeah, there we go, comes with Frenzy, which gives them increased melee attack, charge bonus, armor piercing, base weapon damage. It just makes these things so goddamn dangerous when you need them to be. You also have amazing other options. Some do let you down, so for example, the Minotaurs of Khorne, I think they're strong. I think they cost a little bit too much for what they bring to the battlefield, but I really, really like them. I've never seen anybody bring the regular Minotaurs. They are anti-infantry armor piercing, but most time people bring Minotaurs of Khorne with the great weapons. You know, 110 weapon strength, anti-large, armor piercing. They've got good mobility at 56 speed, but, you know, I think I prefer to see them with less armor and be a little bit faster. I just don't think that's enough armor for it to really be all that impactful. Cavalry options are incredibly strong, but super expensive. Gorby's chariots are really powerful, but also, yet again, really expensive. And this is where you start to see Khorne fall apart a little bit. Most of their options are really expensive. It's a good infantry push faction. There's not too many options. And when you find that actually most of your heavily armored infantry with your Khorne dual weapons or just your regular Khornite warriors, when they fall down and you have to summon them, they've only got 28 speed. Getting that really tanky unit forward to the front line can be very difficult. And what I see a lot of new players do, when they start to fall behind and they start losing these tanky units in maybe the middle domination point or on the flanks, you start seeing them just summoning and spamming Warhounds and Furies to try and maintain that control, but they just don't have the durability to do so. So I find when you fall behind with Khorne, it's really, really tough to get back into it. And you really have to sit back, collect a force and then go for it, but then it can become really easy to react to a slow Khorne force. So I think here, when you are on top with Khorne, you have to maintain that. You absolutely have to maintain that. If you don't, you really have to fall behind here on Bloodletters, which also are not durable, but they're pretty quick, but it can really fall apart very quickly. So that's why I'm going to be having Khorne in B. And the next one is going to be Kislev. Now, Kislev is a very interesting one. So if we go back here to the domination stats, you can see Kislev is going to be falling at 40.5%. So that's going to be the second worst faction in the game according to the rank stats here from CA. Now, do I think this is true for the competitive scene? Absolutely not. I think this is one of the biggest shocks that I saw coming forward here from the patch notes. So I actually believe that Kislev is, I believe it's the bottom of A tier, but I do believe it is a bottom of A tier faction. And there's going to be a couple of reasons why. Well, there's going to be one specific reason why, and that is going to be, there we go, it's already on the screen. You can see I've already thought about this, the light war sleds. These bad boys are incredibly powerful. For the gold cost investment that you pay, 950 gold, you have armor-piercing weapon strength, 120 ammunition there per war sled, with 140 range, good anti-infantry armor-piercing weapon strength, so they can cycle charge through infantry while just pouring that hot, heavy lead into the flanks of all of the monsters around it with 75 speed and great mass. It's very difficult to pin these bad boys in place, and they supplement the army so well. They can get forward ahead of the army, do some fantastic damage, and then you get in with the Tsar Guard and just clear everything else up. I think this is a fantastic faction for sure. Boris is certainly incredibly tanky, a fantastic duelist indeed. He has some amazing abilities like the Shard Blade, which if he gets surrounded, you can see there it's a slow and just does damage. And he's such a great anti-large armor-piercing sniper. He's going to be having a bonus as large as 25, 300 armor-piercing weapon strength. This man is just disgusting. You have very good winds of magic. You have ice magic, tempest magic. You can also bring Tsarina Katerin, who also brings some nice elements to the battlefield, so she can actually protect herself. She does actually have the ability, if I can find it here, so you can get Frost Shield, there we go, the Crystal Cloak, which is 31 seconds of 20% damage resistance whenever she's casting, so it can actually make her super tanky. And yeah, she can really supplement quite nicely. And then also Kostaltin. This man is almost impossible to kill. You put him on a Warbear, you make him super tanky, and he just has so many healing options. The Ward of Ursun, he gets regen when he goes below 25% HP, and it's not just any old regen, it's consistent 0.4%. So imagine her half an Earthblood that is consistent always. It's super nice. He also gets fire damage with the Blaze of Devotion. He also gets leadership and melee defense with the Courage of Sacrifice. He also gets his own healing with the Lullaby, Battle Hymn to give him plus 40 melee attack, 100% Vigor, which is so strong in the later stages. I don't normally take this one, but you can take the Ursun's Roar, which gives you charge bonus and leadership increases, and the Brazen Mace of Ursun, which gives him melee attack, base weapon damage and armor piercing when he's less than 50%. So when he goes below 50%, and even then below 25%, this man just heals so much, he becomes incredibly powerful, and he's so sticky. He's got great melee stats, and he really performs well here on the battlefield. So you've got fantastic Lord choices. The Patriarch is another brilliant hero that pretty much provides the same thing. So you can bring the heals, you can bring melee attack buffs, vigor buffs, Courage of Sacrifice. So you don't actually have to take Kostaltin. Something I quite often do is go Boris with the Patriarch. I bring Boris here on Erskine, who is, yeah, absolutely love the name. But he's super tanky, great healing here, bonuses from the Patriarch as well. Just makes Boris an absolute nightmare here on the battlefield. So we also, and this is something I really want to get into, what makes this an A tier faction in my mind, and why do I think the stats are so low on the ranked? Well, here's the reason. You're going to be having quite a few units. So let's, for example, say Armored Corsairs, Armored Corsair Great Weapons, Corsairs, Corsair Spears. Okay, so you've got 4 different units of Corsairs there. Which do you use? Why do you use them? When do you use them? And how do you use them? This is where it really comes into the faction where you learn it, and also the micro ability here of the light war sleds. So all of these elements coming through with micro, macro, game understanding. When you've got all of these elements that are partnered together for these very experienced players here in the multiplayer scene, that's where you really see Kislev jumping through the ranks. And also here, for example, Zargard. Zargard are very powerful, but you bring the shielded variety, you bring the great weapon variety. You've got 2 different types of Ice Guard, you bring the swords, you bring the glaives. Streltsy, an absolutely fantastic model of missile infantry that can also fight in melee combat with armor piercing, might I add. So it's going to be Thunderers, but basically on steroids. These bad boys are super powerful. Great cavalry options, but they do require a lot of micro. They are tanky with 100 armor and 80 armor, but they have 60 charge bonus and 72 charge bonus. So they really rely on you getting in, doing a good 13-second damage, cycling back out, and then getting that cycle charge, getting that consistent micro going through. The same can be said here for the Warbear Riders. Anti-large armor piercing snipers, bonus as large of 23. These bad boys are super good in the right state. In a vacuum, these bad boys are one of the best anti-large snipers in the game, but they have to be used correctly. And that's where a good game understanding really comes in and can really benefit you here with this faction. So I think once you get a better gaming understanding when it comes here to the multiplayer scenes, where you really see this rocket through the ranks. And I do generally think that for the most part, I do see Kislev winning far much more than I do see with Khorne. But those two, very interchangeable. You could definitely bring this to a high B. You could definitely see this in a low A. But I do see it perform very well here in the Domination scene. They have great other artillery pieces, Little Grom, good anti-large single entity snipers with the Snow Leopards. The Elemental Bear looked a bit garbage when I first saw it, but I've seen a lot of people use it recently, and some people have used it to some amazing use for sure. And it's certainly becoming more and more. I'm very confused about whether this thing is good or bad. It could be insane, it could not be insane. I really don't know. We'll have to wait and see what it can produce in the future. But other things, they have Horse Archers. They're the only faction that has Skirmish Cavalry. They also have Heavy War Sleds as well. So these bad boys, a little bit better here on their cost efficiency. Not quite as powerful. I'd definitely call Light War Sleds overpowered. I definitely would say they're overpowered. I think they're going to get nerfed in the 1.1 patch. And I think when they do, you're going to be seeing... You're definitely going to be seeing Kislev dropping through the ranks. But there's a lot of good reasons here as to why you see Kislev being very strong here in the current multiplayer scene. So we're going to move through to a sad one, and the sad one is going to be Nurgle. I love Nurgle. I think Nurgle is absolutely fantastic, but do they suffer? Absolutely. Why do Nurgle suffer, and why are they in the C tier? Well, Nurgle are incredibly slow, and they don't really have too many ways that you can play them. So there are some very powerful elements. Now you do have the Exalted Great Unclean One, which is probably one of the best legendary lords in the game. This bad boy does have this fantastic ability of the Pestilence Decay. So if we take land battles and let's say we take Slaanesh, if you charge him with infantry, cavalry, the Pestilence Decay is just going to delete them alongside the Stream of Corruption. This bad boy has so many amazing anti-infantry, anti-anything. Even up against Khorne, the Pestilence Decay could really wither down those heavily armoured units that just cannot resist this ability. And it certainly makes this big single entity monster an absolute animal. Plus, on top of that, you do have the Children of Nurgle, which is going to be good healing every single time you cast. Great spells here with the Ransom Visitations, a great single entity sniper. You're also going to be having Fleshy Abundance for the biggest healing in the game. 20 seconds for 1.6% is absolutely phenomenal. Stream of Corruption, which is great up against infantry, and then you can overcast it for extra armor piercing damage. The Miasma of Pestilence, which is going to be a good debuff here, and it's pretty cheap for only 4 Winds of Magic, and then also procs the Children of Nurgle, just to give mass healing here map-wide to all of your Nurglings and the Nurgle roster. So the Cultist as well, this bad boy, I really like him on horseback. He has good mobility, summons here with the Gate of Nurgle. He also has regeneration. He can also bring debuffs to the battlefield. He's certainly one of my favourites here in the roster. I really do like him. But where do Nurgle suffer and why do they suffer? Well, mobility for the most part. What I find here in the top end of the multiplayer scene is that mobility normally dominates. That's strictly true in Warhammer 2, and it's becoming certainly true here in Warhammer 3. So we have infantry units like the Plague Bearers of Nurgle and the Exalted Plague Bearers. They're both going to be at 23 speed. They're 750 gold cost. They're a massive investment, but they're incredibly slow. Now, I've seen some people start with these, and they're very, very tanky. So they have 11,600 and 13,200 health, so they're really, really tough to take down. They can fight back as well. 52 weapon strength can hurt quite nicely. Poison and magic damage, and these ones actually have missiles as well. So think about them a little bit like blasting charges here, maybe a little bit like Iron Breakers, for example, but less on the armor and more on the health. But they're super slow, and they just don't supplement the front line very well. So if you start falling behind, you can find it really difficult as a Nurgle player to get back onto the domination points. But on the reverse, if you start winning and start pushing in front of the domination points, it can be really hard to retake them as the opposing player. Now, you do have some good units. So, for example, you have the Forsaken. Certainly, in my opinion, probably one of their best in the roster. Forsaken are well armored. They do have good poison. They're going to be slower than the Tzeentch Forsaken, but they have good weapon stats. Frenzy really buffs them up to 63 weapon strength, and they are pretty damn strong. They do have some good flyers. They do have Chaos Furies of Nurgle, Rot Flies. They do have good armor piercing options, and the Pox Riders also is probably one of their better units in the game. The Monstrous Beast is certainly where you're going to be spending most of your time. The infantry is not very wide. It's pretty slow. Nurglings have no armor as well. The durability is high. They have a good amount of HP, but they take so much damage. You end up spending your entire time healing yourself with low mobility, and you could really struggle to overwhelm yourself, and they do actually have a massive lack of armor piercing. So if we take into account Pox Riders, they're 1,000 gold cost. If we compare them here to Fleshhounds for 700 gold cost, they're actually going to be having less weapon strength. So they have 64 weapon strength compared to Fleshhounds that have 65 for 300 gold cost less. These ones do have bonuses infantry of 7, which is okay. It's not massive, it's not bad either, but they have less armor piercing. The same armor piercing, but less base weapon damage. They cost 300 gold more. They're also going to be slower. Tanky, yeah, they'll be a little bit tankier, and they do offer a slightly different element than what Fleshhounds do. But for the mobility element of the Nurgle roster, I just don't think they offer enough here to really benefit the roster into a higher tier bracket. If these were a little bit faster, maybe a little bit tankier, it might be a little bit better. Beast of Nurgle, for me, is just not very good at all. I never bring one. Some of the stuff that would be good, for example, the Slime Trail, it's only 15 meters. It really doesn't benefit that much. It does have regen. I thought it'd be maybe a little bit like a Manticore, like 800 gold cost for Terra, but it doesn't even have Terra. The armor piercing and the stats aren't great. It's really not very tanky. It only has 6,000 HP. I just see this thing diving at 800 gold for the most part. Good units though, Chaos Furies, they're pretty good, pretty mobile. They do have poison damage, certainly one of the better Furies out of the bunch. But other than that, yep, it's not very tanky. Any units, or should we say factions that have ranged units, so we say Grand Cathay, Ogres, Kislev, and they really dominate well here up against Nurgle. Any other factions that also have mobility, so if we say Slaanesh as well on top of that, just once they do get the advantage and they do get ahead of you and they start dominating the map, it can be almost impossible. Because even if you're going to be fighting on their side of the battlefield, even if you die on their side of the battlefield and they're closer to the domination point, you can meet them for it because you're just going to be faster, and then you can bring the elements you want to the battlefield, and it's so tough for Nurgle. It really, really is tough. So, if we move on here to our first S-tier faction, we are going to be having the Ogre Kingdoms. Now, if we go back here to the stats, and just to re-talk about Nurgle, you saw that 51% win rate. I think the reason you're going to be seeing it so high here for the ranked playlist is that a lot of people really struggle to deal with tough single entities with good healing. I think most new players really, really struggle with that. But when you see it in the multiplayer scene, a lot of people are very experienced in doing this. So I feel like Nurgle are actually probably the worst faction in the game, not just for land battles, but also domination. I think they really do suffer. But on the flip side, Ogre Kingdoms, 62.6% win rate here on the ranked land battle, the ranked domination. But do we see the same here in the competitive scene? Absolutely. These things are fantastically powerful, and they perform very well indeed, and for a multitude of reasons. So, let's start here with the most powerful one. It's going to be the Iron Blaster. I've never seen a great player bring this and it not pay for itself. It has 1,500 missile strength, armor sundering as well on top of that, with a bucket loads of armor piercing. Armor piercing at 336 armor piercing damage is just absurd. I've seen this thing with 2 shots do 75% damage up against a unit of Minotaurs with great weapons. That's 1,700 gold. It was about 1,100 gold down the drain almost immediately. It was an incredible amount of value, and it paid for itself in 2 shots in about 20 seconds into the game. It's incredibly powerful. 66 speed there from the mobility. It's just so difficult to pin in place. It's very tanky with 90 armor. Can actually fight in melee combat as well. Yeah, it's so tough to take down, and it's so cheap. This is definitely one of the things that is going to be getting a nerf coming in for the 1.1 patch. It's definitely going to be getting more expensive, and yeah, it definitely needs to be. A second unit that is maybe arguably just as powerful, maybe even not more powerful actually, is going to be Gorges. And Gorges have a multitude of reasons as to why they're powerful. So they're one of 2 units in the game that do actually have Stalk. The other one is actually still going to be on the Ogre roster with the Noblar Trappers, but those 2 together, you can really get them together and do all sorts of secret agent ninja flanks and get in and catch all those domination points. Now, the Gorges, they're going to be anti-infantry, armor piercing, 100 weapon strength per model, 60 models in the group, and they are unbreakable. So they will sit on the point until they die, and they will just stay there. And, you know, they do have frenzy, and they're actually going to be a lot stronger than 100 weapon strength. They have great stats, you know, especially up against, like, Khorne infantry. They do very, very well indeed. But you may go, well, logic, they have 15 armor. Yes, but if you take into effect that we take Scribe the Slaughterer, he's going to be having regen here with the Cauldron of the Great Maw. And what do the Gorges have to do? They just have to stand next to him. If they stand next to him, they get healing of 0.2 heal per second. And that's just constant. So you can basically keep the model count nice and high, keep them always healing, and also gives them a base weapon damage and armor piercing increase. So part of these with Scribe the Slaughterer, including they also have a Vanguard deployment, Stalk, they're unbreakable, Frenzy. Man, yeah, they're powerful. They are powerful. They actually have really good charge bonuses. The only thing they struggle with, of course, they're going to be lowly armored, and they don't have much melee defense. They are squishy, but my god, they pack a punch. Something as well here we'll touch about that's very strong is going to be these Saber Tusk packs. I don't think people talk enough about these. Many people go, oh, Flesh Hounds, they're incredibly powerful, they're super OP. But then I don't think they consider Saber Tusks. Saber Tusks have the same model count, they're also going to be large, so they actually have good mass to them, so they can actually pin in cavalry and pin in all good units. But they actually have 70 weapon strength. So if we take it back to the Flesh Hounds, they have 65, 22 of that being armor piercing. We actually have 70 weapon strength here for the Saber Tusks, which are 25 armor piercing and actually an increase on the base weapon damage. They still have the same mobility, same number count, and the same tankiness. They have good health and good armor. The only draw is going to be Rampage. Now, Rampage, of course, is a bit of a debuff, but as long as you've got them in the right areas of the battlefield where you want them to be having an impact, sometimes Rampaging isn't the end of the world, and it does make them 200 gold cheaper. So, at least, yes, they do have less charge bonus, but they hit just as hard, if not harder, and then also they're going to be cheaper. They still cause fear, and they can be an absolute nightmare on the battlefield. So a couple of these options here are really, really powerful. You have good range tools here, lead belchers, 200 range, 94 armor piercing per model, Manny to Ogre pistols, which are very similar, a little bit less on the range, lots of missile strength, and then they can also fight in melee combat. They have brilliant weapon strength, great melee stats as well, and they can also bring big, very tanky single entities to the battlefield. So you can bring Stonehorns, one here with Harpoon Launcher, one here without, and then you can also bring the Hunter. The Hunter can bring quite a few abilities, including the Noblar Feast Stone, certainly one of my favourite in the game. I absolutely love this ability. The fact you can make this big, ginormous thing invisible is it's just fantastically hilarious to me. But it also gives him 15% damage resistance, it gives him Bang Stick, which is a fantastic breath attack ability, Loner, which actually, when they're on their own, they get a speed buff and a leadership buff, plus 12 leadership is really strong. And then they can get crippling throw. On top, the Hunter actually gets anti-large armor-piercing missiles. It's very tanky, has good leadership, pretty good mobility as well for the most part. Yeah, it's just a phenomenally good faction. The mobility is extremely high. Ogre Balls at 54 speed. That's going to be the same speed as the infantry there from Slaanesh, which is the fastest faction in the game. And then they have other great options. So if we take Iron Guts, they're heavily armored. They've got 90 armor and still have 54 speed. They have great armor piercing as well, 100 armor piercing weapon strength, and pretty damn good stats. Good charge bonus. Also here with Ogre Charge, which means they pretty much negate any of the bracing that comes from any other factions. Yeah, they're just incredibly mobile. They hit like a truck, and they have some fantastically well overpowered and overtuned options. So this is why I generally believe that Ogre Kingdoms is S tier, and we're going to be seeing quite a few units here getting tuned, you know, definitely getting some good debuffs. So if we drop back here, we are going to be going into Slaanesh. Now Slaanesh is an interesting one. We're going to be putting in the lower end of B tier. And there's a couple of reasons as to why. Now I really do like Slaanesh, really, really good faction. And it's a very interesting and very hard one to balance. Even CA themselves have said they're not going to be touching it. And it's going to be due to a multitude of reasons. The main reason here is, if I can select it, is going to be the Seekers of Slaanesh. Now, if we take into effect the Devastating Flanker, this ability is going to be very, very hard to balance. This one's really going to be on the edge of a knife, and it could really go either way. If you give it just a little bit too much power, this thing could be just disgustingly overpowered, and you're just going to be seeing mass mobility cav builds that are going to be destroying factions. But on the flip side, if you debuff it a little bit too much, you can actually nerf these into existence, and then you never see any cavalry at all. So it's really, really difficult, because Devastating Flanker gives you a bonus on flank attacks and rear attacks, which is really, really strong here for these mass armor-piercing cavalries with 100 speed and then 40 charge bonus. They're very powerful. Magic, poison as well here. There's a lot of poison on the Slaanesh roster, but of course, with everything here on the faction, they're not very tanky. So this faction actually takes a lot of micro and macro to be very good with this faction. Now, why do I include macro? Because your micro is going to be at the very, very top end, and then also you have to do other stuff on top of that in Domination. So being the fact that your micro is pretty much going to be taking up 99% of your attention, you're also going to have to macro on the battlefield. You have to summon in the correct units in the correct place to make sure they have the right impact on the battlefield, and you can't get that wrong, because you're going to pay a lot here for Devastating Flanker and all sorts of other elements on the battlefield. Now, you are going to have some amazing infantry options, including the Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh, but they're very lightly armoured. They're really good in combat. They do have the Charmed ability, so they do debuff and -8 melee attack. Great weapon stats, but of course, you know, one unit of crossbows and these things will get deleted for, you know, 12,500 gold off the battlefield. The infantry options are super wide. You have Marauders, you have Spears, you have the Hell Scourgers, which is going to be the Whip variant. These two have good melee defense. Spears, it's really nice having good cheap spears. That's what really pushes this faction up. But of course, they're not very tanky. There's nothing on the inventory that is going to hold for you, and pretty much the same for the cavalry. There is really not much here you can hold onto a domination point. You really have to get in, make a massive impact, push them off the domination point, and then have one or two cheap units in behind capturing it whilst you're thumping them to death in their own spawn zone. Now, on top of this, you do actually have some good lord choices, but all of them are spellcasters. There's no way around this. You pretty much have to take a spellcaster, and that's it. So if you see here the Exalted Demonette of Slaanesh, the Shadows Caster is only going to have 5 armor, so it's super glass cannon, but it can fight really well in combat. It's going to be anti-large, armor piercing, and it does have the Ballet of Blows, which can make this thing super powerful. You can get plus 39 melee attack, plus 36% to the increase to base weapon damage and armor piercing, so it can be really strong. Also has Seductive Glory, which can rampage, and And yeah, definitely for sure here with Nikari, you get some fantastic debuff abilities. The Phantasmagoria, which is a nice spell with a debuff to leadership. Also Acquiescence, which can reduce speed and melee defense, on top of Willing Prey, which just makes such a great single entity or very expensive element sniping. We're also going to have the Witsealer Sword, which just makes this guy so goddamn powerful. But as you can see, 4,162 gold cost. He is extremely expensive, and these things are glass cannon. So one misplay with these big legendary lords, and they're going to die. And that's where you see actually most people just bringing cheap heralds. You're going to see a cheap herald here on a Seed of Slaanesh for that mobility, and at the moment the Penumbra Pendulum, the most powerful spell in the game, has actually been taken out. When you come to the multiplayer scene, this has been taken off. So although you're going to be seeing a very high win percentage rate here from the Domination stats, so you can see there, it's actually going to be 55%. I think a lot of that could be attributed to just how powerful the Shadow Magic can be. So I've definitely seen, so for example, Penumbra Pendulum, just one Penumbra Pendulum, I've seen it do 80% damage up against a unit of the Celestial Dragon Guard. It's probably done about 800 to 900 gold value in one spell, which is absolutely absurd for 13 Winds of Magic. Yeah, it's just so goddamn good. And this thing can just really delete and get so much good battlefield control. But here in the multiplayer scene, we can really control for these effects and overpowered spells, which is certainly where you see this faction drop off a little bit. And, you know, at the top of the game, you can certainly see people do very well here with this faction, with its mobility. But sadly, Devastating Flanker, I don't think offers too much. They have the most cost-efficient cavalry in the game, which is going to be the Hellstriders of Slaanesh. They do have the Soul Hunter's ability, immune to psychology, Vanguard deployment, 100 speed, anti-large, poison. So many great stats, but they're just so glass cannon. And as much as I like them in Domination with their mobility, the tankiness really brings it down for me. It really 100% comes on micro, and any small mistakes and you really fall off very quickly here with this faction. So the last faction is going to be Tzeentch. And Tzeentch, yeah, is 100% going to be joining in the A tier. So if we do get back up here with the Domination stats, as you can see, Tzeentch, 56% win rate. Very, very high indeed. 42% loss rate. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting faction, Tzeentch. There's a lot of reasons why I think this is very powerful and why I put this in the A tier. Now, of course, when it comes to Tzeentch, there's a lot to learn, and there's certainly a lot to take in, and you need to have a good understanding of Winds of Magic because you have a massive option. So, if we go here with Karios Fateweaver, he's going to have the most diverse amount of spells. So he's going to be having Regrowth, Penumbral Pendulum, Harmonic Convergence, the Blue Fire of Tzeentch. All four of these spells are incredibly powerful. The bottom two don't mind too much. But also some of these abilities are some of the best abilities in the game. Fateweaver is incredibly powerful, so the Void Pendulum is really nice. You can steal Winds of Magic there from your opponent. The Staff of Tomorrow just gives you massive cooldowns, so you can just completely keep spamming abilities and spells. And then the Scroll of Destiny is going to be the most powerful reserves per second in the game of any ability or item. So this thing gives you 0.4% of your Winds reserves back for 46 seconds. It's absolutely fantastic. The Gate of Fate, a fantastic next spell, negative 40 melee attack. The Oracle of Eternity, which actually gives damage resistance here to Fateweaver. His main weakness is actually going to be he's a really bad melee combatant, but the Oracle of Eternity does make him quite tanky. Greater Arcane Conduit is super powerful. Even in Warhammer 2, this thing was an absolute must-bring. Faster Change giving damage resistance, that's going to be map-wide, and then also Life Leeching, which just gives him more power reserves. Tzeentch is all about magic, and magic is super powerful here in this faction. You're also going to be having, so you can actually bring here the Law of Tzeentch, which is going to be a new spell. So you can bring the Pink Fire of Tzeentch, the Blue Fire of Tzeentch, which is a great Lord sniping abilities. And then with these guys, you can actually bring Chaos Furies, which you can summon in the sky. So these big bad chickens can fly, and they have great mobility. 90 speed is really quite nice. And then the Portaglyph, which they can protect themselves. And then we have these little guys here, which is going to be the Helder Tzeentch. These boys have missiles as well, so they can fly on their little discs, which is nice and cheap. And they have 105 speed on their discs, good missile strength, and yeah, the Lord choices are very good. Metal Magic, Tzeentch Magic, a good mixture from Karios Fateweaver, Fire Magic from the Cultists, which are really powerful as well. They can, in good areas of the battlefield, they can summon Pink Horrors. They also get Power Stones, which actually gives them more mana reserves. And then also Kindle Flame, which really partners quite nicely up with probably their most powerful unit, which is going to be the Blue Horrors of Tzeentch. These bad boys are incredibly powerful. Most people didn't like miners with blasting charges from the dwarf roster in Warhammer 2 because you know, their blasting charges did so much damage. The explosion damage, both of them getting flying in the front. If you didn't have armor, they just deleted you. And that's going to be the same here for the Blue Horrors. The 5 ammunition, not too massive on the range, but they're so cheap. There's so many numbers, and 5 units of these bad boys have brilliant capture weight. They're fantastic on the battlefield. They're really weaken units coming forward, and they're just a nightmare to deal with. Those partnered up with pink horrors in behind, so you're going to be having blue horrors shooting in the front with pink horrors shooting over the top of them. It's just going to be mass damage throughout the battlefield. The DPS is super high, and you really have to bring good armored infantry to deal with these really irritating units. On top of that, we are going to have the Forsaken of Tzeentch. I don't believe that these are any better than the Nurgle ones, but they are still super strong. They have 40% spell resistance, which is really, really strong. That is going to protect them up against the penumbra pendulums and any other good spells that can damage them, you know, quite immensely. 46 speed, which can be more mobile than Nurgle units. Still 63 weapon strength. They actually have magic damage, so they can fight up against demons quite nicely. They'll circumvent all the physical resistances that are applied there. And they're very, very tanky. Yeah, 85 armor, good leadership, they'll fight very well, and they have good capture weight. So they're going to really supplement and give some good tankiness to the lightly armored force of the Blue Horrors and the Pink Horrors. Now, one thing we really do suffer here, and it's the only thing we really suffer from Tzeentch, is going to be armor piercing. Now, there are 2 ways around this. The first one is going to be the Spawn. Spawn have armor sundering, so it's going to be negative 30 armor, so you can work around that, and then you can actually see that Forsaken with 63 weapon strength should be able to carry the day with some armor sundering from the Spawn of Tzeentch. Now, the other way around that is going to be Flamers, and Flamers are really strong. They're incredibly glass cannon, but they have 338 armor piercing, and then also warp flame damage here on any units. Now, it's only 90 range, but they do so much damage. I don't think there's anything that does quicker damage in the game here than Flamers. But they're a fantastic armor piercing option. They also give fire weaknesses, negative to armor as well, which really supplements quite nicely alongside Blue Horrors and Pink Horrors. So you can see armor sundering, you can see armor weaknesses here from the Flamers, and then you just delete with this mass range. And the cost efficiency of Blue Horrors and Pink Horrors is just immense. I've seen Blue Horrors get in the regions up to 1600, like quadruple their value, and they're just incredibly strong. On top of that, you have great cavalry options. You have Doom Knights of Tzeentch, and then also the Chaos Knights. And when these here are buffeted by their barrier ability, which is what we're going to move on to next, this is what really turns over for Tzeentch. So a lot of people here in the community have very publicly said multiple times that the barriers are really powerful. And I certainly agree. I certainly do think they're very powerful. But, you know, they definitely can be dealt with certain factions. But some factions really struggle with this barrier. Now, with the great mobility of the Doom Knights of Tzeentch, which are incredibly powerful, they are going to have 105 speed, and of course they're flying. They have good charge bonuses, good weapon strength, they can pick the engagements they want, they can get a good charge off, fight for 13 seconds and pull out, and as long as they keep 100% of their health, they get their full barrier back. So that is 100% regen there for them, and that's going to be always. That doesn't stop. That consistently keeps coming, and that's for all units. All these units have barrier, which gives them some good protection. Chaos Knights as well have it, and they're going to be super heavily armored at 120 armor, bronze shield, great melee stats, a little bit low on the mobility, but still rather strong. And, you know, getting through that barrier, then actually making chunk damage on them can be really, really tough. And that's really what makes it so tough here to snipe up against these Lord choices. 90 speed up to 105 speed with barrier. You know, you're going to be shooting them. Once you've got one volley out, they can move a little bit. They can regen some of that barrier back. Then you could be shooting the barrier again. And it just becomes so goddamn irritating. But a good player with good micro knowledge and awareness can really make this faction really powerful. On top of this, they have other great flying options. So you're having Chaos Furies and Screamers. Screamers is going to be an anti-large armor piercing. Furies are going to be a mass magic push that also have the barrier ability. So they can get, you know, maybe one volley is going to get shot onto the Furies, and they can then charge into combat, and they're not going to be taking too much damage there, hopefully. So there's lots of amazing options here for Tzeentch, and they bring so much here to the battlefield that, and if you can get your micro performing at a very high level, this barrier is an absolute nuisance to deal with. And then on top of that, if you bring Carrios Fateweaver with healing and regrowth, even if you do take permanent damage, you can heal that back, and then your barrier can return to full fruition. And that's what makes Tzeentch incredibly irritating to play against. So guys, here is going to be the final kind of graph here. So you can see Ogres and S, Tzeentch and then Kislev and A. We're going to be having Khorne into Slaanesh, and then Cathay into Nurgle. So that's the way that I'm going to be viewing the current multiplayer scene in the 1.0.2 patch, but I'd love to know what you guys think. Hopefully I went into enough detail. I tried not to go into it too much. I could talk about this for a millennia, but hopefully you enjoyed the little tidbits that I went into. And then when the 1.1 patch does come out, I will be updating this, and I'll continuously update this with all of the future changes that are going to come here into the Warhammer scene and the multiplayer scene, and then, you know, try and keep on top of it, this for you guys, so you can see basically my thoughts and my opinions, and hopefully you can try and keep up with the multiplayer scene and enjoy it with the rest of us. So if you liked today, then please feel free to leave a like on the video. It really does help. Feel free to leave a comment down below, but of course, please be respectful to myself and other people in the comments. Feel free to subscribe. It really does help you on the channel. You guys have been supporting me so much, so thank you very much for that. And then, of course, feel free to check out that description for all my other social media platforms, including Discord and Twitch. I've been your boy Logic. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all very, very soon.